All right, guys, another day, another strength, rolling right along. And we have the best squat accessories for strength, right? So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm talking about the low bar squat here. I am your average starting strength enthusiast, right? So I quite enjoy the low bar squat, and that is my primary squat for my clients and for myself. So I'm going to talk about lifts that pertain to that. All right. So number 3, the conventional deficit deadlift, right? Throwing a curveball at you. Right? So squats and deadlifts go together like peanut butter and jelly. They go great. They're super similar movement patterns, right? So the deadlift in general works very well as an overload variation for the squat. So partial squats tend to not work very well, probably because they are very stressful in the joints because of the way that you're loading yourself. It's a little bit more unstable than a deadlift. That's just my analysis of it. May or may not be true, but in general, the important thing is that partial squats tend to not work, but conventional deadlifts work great for the squat, for whatever reason, right? So the conventional deficit deadlift takes the deadlift and makes it even a bit more similar to the squat by increasing the range of motion, which is why I like it a lot. And it places a heavy emphasis on the posterior chain specifically, so the glutes, the hamstrings, and the lower and upper back. And the lower back, so the squat and the deadlift tend to share the fact that the lower and even the upper back can be the weak point in the lift. So this is going to hammer the heck out of those, make them really strong, and then you're going to have less issues with your low bar squat. Number 2, we have the high bar and safety bar squat. So I kind of use them interchangeably. They're a little bit different, but they're similar enough that I'll put them in there together. Basically, you're just taking the squat and adjusting the angles in the joints a little bit so that you're using more of the quads and a little bit more upper back as well. Or rather, you're placing more of the stress on those two muscles, right? So you have more stress on the knee, and then because you're more vertical and the bar's trying to push you over, more so in a safety bar squat, but still in a high bar squat a bit, it's going to train the upper back pretty hard. These are great because they're easier to recover from than low bar squats, right? Due to the nature of them just being lighter in general. So you can perhaps program them with more frequency, but they're still specific enough to the squat. So in the bench video, I talked about how that one is very open to variation. The squat is not. Squat is all about, give me more squats, more squat specific movement patterns to make me stronger. So this is one of those that you can use. And then another benefit is that it places less stress on the shoulders, the elbows, and the wrists, which can be important if you're a particularly strong squatter or just in general. Some people have issues with those areas. The low bar squat can put a lot of stress on those joints, especially if you're not doing it properly. But if you do high bar and safety bar squats, you're going to put less stress on the shoulders, elbows, and wrists, and they can recover a little bit better. And then number 1, my personal favorite squat assistance movement for strength. This is the paused squat. So similar to the bench video where close grip bench was number 1, because it carries over 100% to the bench, in my opinion at least, right? But we see it all the time. The pause squat is the same thing with the squat. It's the most specific squat variation in the sense that you're basically doing the exact same thing, but you're just stopping at the bottom, making it harder. So that being said, if your pause squat goes up, your squat goes up 100% of the time, right? If you're squatting 315 and you get your pause squat to 315, that means that your squat went up, always. Another benefit to the pause squat is that it's easier on the joints, so it's easier to recover from as well. I guess those are two separate things, but it's easier on the joints because you're not like bouncing out of the bottom. Especially if you have a particularly strong bounce, you might be slamming into the bottom, putting a lot of stress on your knees and your hips. This way, you're pausing at the bottom, it's controlled, and then you're going to recover great from it. And then you could even argue that, if you look at hypertrophy criteria, the pause squat might even be superior for hypertrophy because you're getting more time under tension. That's another benefit. But then a really, really huge one that's unique to the pause squat is that you can pair it with any other squat variation. So you could do a high bar pause squat, SSB pause squat, and then even like leg machine work, you can do like pause leg press, pause hack squat, whatever, for the same reasons. It's just easier on the joints, easier to recover from, and then you can apply it pretty much anywhere. So squatting is a pretty specific skill, as are all these main lifts, but the squat does not benefit as well from variation as the bench press does. And we'll talk about some of the lifts that do benefit it, and then some of the lifts that don't, and perhaps why they don't, and why they do, and so on and so forth. So my first honorable mention is the pin squat, right? Which is very, very similar to the pause squat. So they're almost interchangeable, but they're different enough that I didn't put them in the same category. The pin squat, some downsides is that you have to have the right equipment to do it. So you should be pause squatting in a power rack, but you don't have to use like a standard power rack. You can use like a squat stand. You can even have spotters, but you can't do that with a pin squat. So you do have to have a power rack for pin squatting. It has to be like the specific, straight bars. If you have like those little, what are they called? Like they're like strap safeties. I guess you could do a pin squat with that, but it's kind of the way it sinks into it. I feel like would be a little bit different and not ideal. But yeah, the pin squat, the main reason I didn't include it with the pause squat is because it is actually a little bit more difficult to recover from, a little more stressful, because with the pause squat, you still have a good bit of stretch reflex at the bottom, even though you're pausing. The pin squat, you have to break the bar off the pins from a dead stop. It's very stressful. And it's actually kind of difficult to recover from if you haven't tried it. So definitely try it out. But they still work very well, so I still have them here. If I were to include pin squats, I would have them as part of a conjugate rotation. But you can have squats and pause squats during the same week as 2 separate days, but I wouldn't do that with squats and pin squats personally. The front squat, that's my next one. This one I didn't include because it can be kind of cumbersome. Not everyone can do it. It kind of chokes the heck out of your neck, especially depending on your anthropometry and whatnot. Some people just can't even get into the front rack position at all. So, and I don't think it's like that beneficial to where you have to do them. So they can be helpful if you can do them, but they're not like, these are the best squat accessory. Otherwise they'd be in the top 3, which they're not. This one, a little bit of a dark horse here. I have single leg work. I think that's pretty useful, as it turns out. The reason is because it is easy to recover from. And I'll give a spoiler that I have compound machine leg work in the does not work that well category. And so before I get crucified for that, the reasoning is because the goal here is to get the strongest squat possible, right? So you can do like an off season if you want to do a bunch of compound machine leg work, that's great. But if you're trying to have a strong squat in conjunction with doing machine leg work, then that's gonna be one of the first things to go, right? But the single leg work, it's a lot easier to recover from because you're using one leg at a time. And there's just not that much loading in general on the spine and on other parts of your body with those. So I do like the single leg work because I feel like you can do a heavy squat and then go ahead and knock out some of those afterwards. Whereas if you're doing a heavy squat and then you gotta go knock out like, Widowmaker set of hack squats, that is a tall order. And then similarly, machine isolation leg work I think works pretty well for the same reasons. It's just, not that difficult to work in and recover from. Not a lot of downside to doing it. So like leg extensions, leg curls, that sort of thing, adductor work. And then deadlifting in general. So I had the conventional deficit deadlift as a specific one, but really all types of deadlift are going to carry over to your squat for the reasons that I outlined. And then what does not work, partial squats in general, kind of alluded to that. It's really just, I think, the amount of load that you're placing on the joints, like the recovery demands, and then you're losing half the range of motion, and the hardest part of the squat's at the bottom. So you're just not training the hardest part of the squat. And then you're putting a bunch of stress on your joints and beating yourself up. So I don't think those are worth doing pretty much ever. Any kind of dumbbell squat except for split squats, those ones are good, but I'm thinking like goblet squats or like squats where you like hold the dumbbells up here, anything that's like unstable like that. Bosu ball squats, that should go without saying, right? Any kind of that silliness. And then I already talked about machine compound leg work, which, that can work, just in general I find it tends not to. But I'm sure there are ways that you can, sneak in like a leg press with your squat if you program it a certain way. But just in general, it's not worth doing. So the good news with the squat is that you don't need a lot of variation, but the bad news is that, you're going to stick to just squatting. So if you don't like it, then you're kind of stuck with just doing that to get your squat to go up. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, say something in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, goodbye.